There are people in your life right now who can't be trusted. Not because they look dangerous, not because they hurt you loudly, but because they hide their harm behind charm, kindness, and quiet manipulation. Carl Jung didn't just study the mind. He studied what people hide, and he made it clear. The most dangerous people aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet ones who blend in, pretending to care while slowly tearing you down from the inside. They don't always shout. They don't always abuse. Sometimes they smile. That's what makes them dangerous. That's why you keep missing the signs. Jung made it his life's work to understand not just the persona, the mask we wear, but the shadow, the dark parts we hide. Because people don't show you who they really are. They show you what they think will work. If you're not aware, you'll give your time, energy, trust, and even love to someone who was never safe to begin with. So Jung laid out 6 patterns, 6 masks, 6 personality types that seem harmless at first but quietly destroy you if you're not awake. Let's begin. 1. The chronic victim. This person never takes responsibility. Everything that happens to them is someone else's fault. They're always suffering, always attacked, always wronged. On the surface, you feel bad for them. You want to help. You become emotionally invested in their recovery. But Jung saw this clearly. People who live in permanent victimhood are often hiding deep manipulation. Because if you're always the victim, you never have to be accountable. You never have to change. You never have to face your own darkness. The chronic victim uses their pain as a weapon. They guilt-trip you. They twist reality. They pull sympathy out of you and turn it into obligation. You don't help them. You end up carrying them. And the worst part? They don't want healing. They want control. Jung warned us, when someone is always a victim, they've likely fused with their shadow, the part of them that thrives on emotional manipulation under the disguise of helplessness. These people will never change, because to change would mean losing the only power they have, your pity. 2. The charming mirror. Jung called this the persona trap. Someone who reflects exactly what you want to see. They're agreeable, supportive, they laugh at your jokes, they admire your dreams, they validate your insecurities. At first, they feel like your biggest supporter. But slowly, you notice something strange. You don't actually know who they are. Because they're not showing you anything real. They're mirroring you to gain trust. Jung wrote that when a person becomes too attached to their persona, they become just a mask. The real self stays hidden, protected, and unaccountable. The charming mirror is dangerous because it makes they feel safe. But what's behind the mask? Nothing. No substance, no stability, no real values. Only the ability to adapt, to copy, to impress. They're not loyal to you. They're loyal to your approval. The moment you stop admiring them, they vanish. Or worse, they turn against you. You didn't meet them. You met your reflection in their performance. And trusting someone like that is like shaking hands with smoke. 3. The passive-aggressive enabler. This one is subtle. They don't openly criticize. They don't fight you directly. They let you speak. Then they suggest. They hint. They undermine. This person will nod when you share your dream, then later say something like, "That's ambitious. I just don't want you to be disappointed." Or, "You're so brave for trying that. I don't think I'd ever risk failing like that." Sounds supportive, right? But it isn't. Jung described this as the hidden shadow of the helper. These people don't attack your decisions. They slowly eat away at your confidence through emotional suggestion. They present doubt as concern. They present fear as logic. They present judgment as wisdom. If you're not conscious, you'll take on their limitations as your own. Jung believed this type is especially dangerous because they pretend to lift you while quietly making sure you never outgrow them. Because if you succeed without them, they lose their grip, they lose relevance. So they clip your wings before you ever take flight. And they call it support. 4. The secret competitor. This person isn't competing with the world. They're competing with you, but not openly. They pretend to be your friend. They applaud your success. They act happy for you. But every time something good happens to you, they find a way to make it about them. They minimize it. They redirect attention. They tell their own story, slightly better, slightly more impressive. Jung believed this type is driven by unconscious inferiority. They don't hate you. They resent what you reflect at them, their own feelings of not being enough. Instead of owning that feeling and growing from it, they compete secretly. They copy your ideas and claim them as theirs. They give backhanded compliments. They only celebrate you when they're ahead, never when you're above. You feel it in the tension, in the forced praise, in the subtle shifts. And here's the twist. When you fail, they'll feel relief. But they won't say it. They'll just say, "I was afraid this might happen. I tried to warn you." Jung warned, never trust someone who can't clap when it's not their turn to win. 5. The spiritual narcissist. This person presents themselves as enlightened, mature, and emotionally advanced. They speak softly. They quote philosophy. They talk about healing, alignment, shadow work, and mindfulness. They present themselves as above conflict, above ego. But in truth, they're deeply attached to being seen as superior. Jung would call this a split psyche, where the conscious mind clings to spiritual identity while the unconscious shadow leaks out as quiet superiority, control, and judgment. They don't dominate you by arguing. They dominate you by always being the calm one, making you feel emotional, unhealed, or spiritually inferior anytime you push back. They say things like, "Sounds like a trigger you haven't dealt with yet," or "You're still reacting. You have inner work to do." It sounds wise, but it's really a power play. They use spiritual language to dismiss your reality. You can't win an argument because they'll never admit to one. You can't confront them because they'll reframe your anger as your flaw. Jung warned about this, especially because the spiritual narcissist often builds their persona out of an unintegrated ego. They didn't kill their ego. They just dressed it up in robes and crystals. They don't want equals. They want students. They don't want healing. They want authority. 6. The Empathic Controller. Jung wrote often about projection, how people unconsciously assign their own needs and wounds onto others. The 6th type is a master of this. They feel everything. They sense energy. They pick up on moods, body language, and tension. They cry easily. They comfort you often. They make you feel deeply seen. At first, this seems like a gift. It feels like a connection. But over time, it becomes something else. Control through sensitivity. You start adjusting your behavior so you don't disturb them. You suppress your reactions so you don't hurt them. You hesitate to express frustration because they'll say, "That energy really affects me." Before you realize it, you're not expressing yourself at all. You're managing them because they've convinced you their pain is your fault. Jung warned about this subtle danger. Many people who claim to be highly sensitive are actually projecting their unhealed chaos outward and demanding the world organize itself around their wounds. This is where the empath becomes toxic. They don't want a connection. They want emotional safety at your expense. Why these people exist? Now you might ask, why do these people exist? Why do they act this way? Jung's answer is brutally clear, because they never met their shadow. So now, they make you carry it. They never face the part of them that's manipulative, so they project it onto you. They never admitted their need for control, so they control people in the name of love or support. They never took responsibility for their pain, so they made it your job to fix. These people aren't rare. They're everywhere, and they thrive around people who don't know how to protect their energy. Jung believed the only protection was self-awareness, to spot the mask, to see through the kindness, to hear what's not being said, and walk away before you need proof. The real warning, Here's what most people miss. You attract what you haven't integrated. If you're always attracting manipulators, there's a part of you that's still afraid to stand in your own truth. If you're always surrounded by victims, there's a part of you that needs to be needed to feel valuable. Jung taught that the shadow is everything you've repressed. The parts of you that you were told were too much or too selfish or not lovable. So you buried them. You became nice, helpful, and agreeable. But here's the trade-off. You lost your edge. You lost your instincts. You lost your barrier to harm. When you repress your anger, you tolerate disrespect. When you repress your intuition, you ignore red flags. When you repress your self-protection, you keep letting in people who pretend to love you and then slowly consume you. Jung didn't want you to become cold. He wanted you to become whole. What to do now? Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Stop trying to be perfect. Let yourself say no. Let yourself get angry. Let yourself question people's intentions. Your shadow isn't evil. It's protective. Trust what you felt the first time. That moment your gut said something's off here. That wasn't paranoia. That was your subconscious reading patterns before your mind caught up. The people Jung warned us about don't show up with warning signs. They show up with flattery, emotional stories, and healing talk. But time always tells. Carl Jung didn't want you to fear the world. He wanted you to stop fearing your own knowing. The more shadow you integrate, the fewer toxic people get close. Not because you're hiding, but because your energy no longer gives them entry. You become someone no manipulator can reach, no narcissist can fool, no competitor can rattle. Because you are now awake, whole, and impossible to trick. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe, not just for more content, but to join a growing space where truth, healing, and self-discovery matter. This is Psyche Thera, and your journey is just beginning.